The river gauge was screaming danger, but my boss locked the factory gates to protect the quarterly quota. He claimed the flood warnings were exaggerated. I knew the river never lied. I walked out, fired on the spot, only to return 3 hours later in a rescue boat. I saved my crew, but when I saw him shivering on the roof, I made a choice that destroyed his career forever. Chapter 1: The Rising Red Line. The smell of a coming flood is distinct. It's not just the scent of rain. It's the smell of disturbed earth, churned up mud, and old rotting wood being dragged from the riverbed. I had lived in this valley for all of my 55 years, and I knew that smell better than I knew the scent of my own coffee. I stood by the loading dock doors of Gordon Manufacturing, staring out at the murky gray sheet of rain that had been hammering us for 3 days straight. The river, usually a polite neighbor sitting 200 yards away, was now an angry, unswollen beast licking at the edge of the employee parking lot. "Close the door, Olson. You're letting the humidity in. It messes with the cardboard stock." I didn't turn around immediately. I knew that voice. It was Archer Gordon, our plant manager. He was a man who wore Italian loafers to a factory floor and complained about dust. He was 35, had an MBA on his wall, and didn't know the difference between a socket wrench and a socket puppet. I slid the heavy metal door shut, such cutting off the roar of the rain, replacing it with the rhythmic thump hiss of the hydraulic presses. "Mr. Gordon," I said, wiping my wet hands on my coveralls, "have you checked the Army Corps updates? The gauge at the bend just hit 28 feet. Flood stage is 30. Gordon didn't look up from his tablet. He was tapping away, his face illuminated by the blue light, looking bored. "It's projected to crest at 29, Austin. Don't be an alarmist. We have a shipment for Tech Global that has to leave the dock by 6 p.m. If we miss the window, we pay penalties." "The water is rising a foot an hour," I said, keeping my voice level. "At this rate, the access road will be underwater by noon. My guys, Ben, Linda, the whole shift, they drive sedans. If they don't leave soon, they won't get out." Gordon finally looked up. His eyes were cold, like polished cones. "If they leave, they don't get paid, and if the line stops..." "I start looking for a foreman who can actually manage a schedule. Are we clear?" I looked over his shoulder. Through the high, reinforced windows, I could see the sky. It wasn't gray anymore. It was a bruised purple. The pressure in the air was heavy enough to give you a headache. "The Levee Road is the only way out," I pressed. "If that breaches..." "It won't breach," Gordon snapped, turning his back on me. "Get back to work, Olson. Just stop trying to find excuses to slack off." I walked back onto the floor, my stomach tight. I saw Ben, one of our forklift drivers, limping toward his machine. Ben was 60, with knees that clicked loud enough to hear over the conveyor belts. He had given this company 20 years. "Hey, Austin," Ben called out, shouting over the noise. "My wife just texted. She says the creek behind our house is over the bank. She wants me home to help sandbag." "Hold tight, Ben," I said, though I felt like a liar. "I'm working on it." I looked at the clock, 10:15 a.m. I walked over to the break room where the old television was mounted in the corner. Usually, it played safety videos on a loop, but someone had switched it to the local news. The weatherman looked pale, his unprecedented rainfall upstream. "The dam operators are forced to open the spillways to prevent structural failure. We are looking at a rapid rise event. Immediate evacuation is recommended for low-lying industrial zones." I didn't wait to hear the rest. I pulled out my phone and checked the gauge app. It wasn't at 28 feet anymore. It was at 29.5. The water wasn't following Gordon's schedule. It was coming for us, and it was coming fast. Chapter 2: Profit Over People. I marched straight to the glass-walled office that overlooked the factory floor. Archer Gordon was sitting there, feet up on his desk. "Send open mon," causing it to slam against the open, causing it to slam against the stopper. Gordon jumped, dropping his feet to the floor. He covered the receiver. "What the hell, Olson? I'm on a conference call with corporate." "Hang up," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it was hard. "We need to evacuate, now." Gordon's face went red. He muttered something into the phone and hung up. You barge in here one more time, and I'll write you up for insubordination. I told you the projection is..." "The projection is wrong," I interrupted, stepping up to his desk. "They opened the spillways upstream. The news just confirmed it. The water isn't stopping at 29 feet, Gordon. It's going to hit 32, maybe 34. That puts 4 feet of water on this production floor." Gordon stood up, smoothing his suit jacket. He was taller than me. But of a weather report. We finished the shift of a weather report. We finished the shift. 6 p.m. That is final. You're risking lives for cardboard boxes and circuit boards, I said, feeling the anger rise in my throat like bile. Ben can hardly walk. Linda has 2 kids at daycare across the bridge. If the bridge washes out, yeah, she can't get to them. Then she should have planned better, Gordon said dismissively. He walked around the desk and stood toe-to-toe with me. Let me explain how the real world works, Austin. In the real world, you do what the company pays you to do. If you panic the staff and cause a walkout, I will fire every single person who leaves, and I will make sure you never work in this industry again. He smirked, a nasty, arrogant curl of his lip. Unless, of course, you're scared. A big tough guy like you afraid of a little puddle? I looked at him. I looked at the expensive watch on his wrist, the dry, climate-controlled air of his office, and the total lack of humanity in his eyes. This isn't a negotiation, Gordon said, pointing at the door. Get out. If I see anyone stop working, it's on your head. I turned and looked out the glass wall. Down below, Linda was taping boxes, glancing nervously at her phone every 30 seconds. Ben was rubbing his knee. Gordon replied, sitting back down. Was hiring a foreman who thinks he's a meteorologist. Close the door on your way out. I left the office, but I didn't go back to the line. I walked to the nearest emergency exit and pushed the bar. The alarm chirped for a second before I silenced it with my key override. As I stepped out onto the metal grating of the side stairs, the reality hit me like a physical blow. The parking lot was gone. The water wasn't at the edge anymore. It was halfway to the building. Brown, churning water was swirling around the tires of the cars in the first row. A plastic dumpster floated by, spinning lazily in the current. It wasn't rising a foot an hour. It was rising a foot every 15 minutes. I checked my watch. 11:45 a.m. If we waited until 6 p.m., well, we wouldn't be driving out. We wouldn't be walking out. We would be swimming. I went back inside. I had a choice to make. I could follow orders and watch my friends get trapped, or I could disobey and lose everything I'd worked for. Chapter 3. Walking Out Alone. I walked to the center of the floor and hit the red button on the main pillar. It was the emergency stop for Line A. The machinery groaned and shuddered into silence. The sudden quiet was deafening. Every head turned toward me. Well, listen up, I shouted, my voice echoing off the metal rafters. Everyone, listen to me. Grab your keys and get out. Now. The access road is flooding. If you don't leave in the next 10 minutes, you're going to be trapped here. The confusion on their faces was heartbreaking. They looked from me to the glass office where Gordon was now standing, banging on the window, his face purple with rage. Austin, what about the shift? Linda asked, holding a tape gun. Her voice trembled. So, forget the shift, Linda, I yelled. Go get your kids. Ben, leave the forklift. Take my truck if yours won't start. It's parked on the upper ridge. Just go. The door to the office flew open, and Gordon came storming down the metal stairs, nearly tripping in his haste. Get back to work, he screamed. He's lying. The water is fine. Anyone who clocks out is fired. Do you hear me? Fired with cause. No unemployment, no severance. The workers hesitated. Since this was the weapon Gordon always used. Fear. Fear of poverty. Fear of the future. In this economy, losing a job was a death sentence for some of them. Look outside, I countered, pointing to the loading dock. Don't look at him. Look at the water. He doesn't care if you drown. He only cares about his bonus. Gordon reached the floor and shoved me. It wasn't a hard shove, but it was enough. Get your things, Olson. You're done. Get off my property. I looked at Ben. Ben, please. Ish go. Ben looked at Gordon, then at his feet. I can't lose the pension, Austin. I've only got 2 years left. I'm warning you, Gordon hissed at the crowd. Back to your stations. Now. Slowly, painfully, they turned back to the machines. Linda looked at me with tears in her eyes, mouthed, I'm sorry, and picked up a box. Ben climbed back onto the forklift. They were staying. Fear had won. You heard the man, Gordon sneered at me. Get out. Yeah, before I call the cops for trespassing. I looked at them one last time. I felt a crushing weight in my chest, a mix of failure and dread. I couldn't physically drag 40 people out of the building. You're going to regret this, Gordon, I said, my voice low. When the water hits the transformers, this place goes dark. I hope you know how to swim. I turned and walked to the locker room. I grabbed my rain gear and my go bag. I didn't look back. I walked out the side door into the storm. So the water was up to my shins in the parking lot. My truck, a lifted 4x4, was parked on the landscaping berm, the highest point in the lot. I waded toward it, the cold water soaking through my jeans instantly. As I climbed into the cab, I saw Gordon watching me from the loading dock, arms crossed, a smug look on his face. He thought he had won. He thought he had crushed a rebellion. I started the engine and threw it into low gear. I plowed through 2 feet of water to get to the main gate. Yet the water was rising so fast I could actually see it creeping up the chain-link fence. I drove up the incline toward the county road, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was safe. I was out. But as I reached the high ground and looked back down into the valley, I saw the river crest the bank. A wall of brown sludge began to pour into the industrial park. I pulled over. I couldn't just leave. I wasn't that kind of man. You're doing. I need the skiff. We have a you're doing. I need the skiff. We have a situation at the plant. Chapter 4. The Levee Breaks. I sat in my truck on the ridge overlooking the valley, the windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the deluge. It was 12:30 p.m. From this vantage point, the industrial park looked like a toy set being slowly swallowed by a muddy brown snake. My phone buzzed. It was Tate. "I'm hitching the trailer now, Austin," Tate's voice crackled, barely audible over the wind. "But you need to know, the sheriff just closed County Road 9. They're saying the earthen levee behind the old mill is showing stress fractures. If that goes, the whole lower basin becomes part of the river." "That's exactly where Gordon is keeping them," I said, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. "He's got 40 people on the floor, Tate. It to be nasty." I hung up and looked back to be nasty. I hung up and looked back down at the factory. Through the gray curtain of rain, I saw the lights of Gordon Manufacturing flicker. Once, twice. Then, darkness swallowed the building. The transformers had blown. "God help them," I whispered. I threw the truck into gear and spun the tires. Been mud spraying up the fenders as I raced toward the north side launch. The roads were treacherous. Creeks that were usually dry ditches were now raging torrents, overspilling culverts and washing gravel across the asphalt. I saw a sedan stalled out in a dip in the road, water up to its door handles, abandoned. I reached the launch at 1:15 p.m. Tate was already there, backing his heavy-duty Ford down the slick concrete ramp. And on the trailer sat the Mule, a 20-foot aluminum flat-bottom skiff with a reinforced hull and a 200-horsepower jet drive engine. It wasn't pretty, but it was built for shallow, debris-filled water. Tate jumped out of his truck, a giant of a man in a yellow slicker. "Water's up 3 feet since I called you," he shouted over the roar of the river. "The current is ripping at about 15 knots. This isn't a rescue, Austin. It's a suicide run. If we don't go, they die," I said. He's grabbing a life vest from the back of his truck. "Linda's in there. Ben's in there. They're good people, Tate. They just have a bad boss." Tate looked at me, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. He spat on the ground. "All right, let's go get wet." Just as we were unstrapping the boat, a sound like a cannon shot echoed through the valley. It was a deep, resonant crack that vibrated in my chest. We both froze. "That was the levee," Tate said grimly. We looked toward the south. A massive plume of white spray shot up into the air as the earthen wall gave way. The river, held back for decades, surged forward with the force of a freight train. It wasn't creeping anymore. It was charging. I checked my watch. 1:45 p.m. The water was about to hit the factory. Chapter 5. Launching the Skiff. We shoved off, the jet drive screaming as Tate gunned the engine to fight the initial surge of the current. The water was the color of chocolate milk and thick with debris. Entire trees, uprooted and stripped of their leaves, bobbed past us like deadly battering rams. "Keep your eyes on the bow," Tate yelled from the console. "Call out the deadheads." I stood at the front, gripping the rail with one hand and pointing with the other. "Log at 2 o'clock, pallet at 10 o'clock. The boat bucked and slammed against the waves. This wasn't a lake. It was a chaotic, swirling mess of physics gone wrong. We navigated through what used to be the town's main street. Yes, the stop signs were barely poking out of the water. We motored past the gas station, where the pumps were submerged, leaving only the canopy visible like a strange flat island. "It's worse than 93, I shouted back to Tate. "Look at the high water mark on the bank building." "Focus, Austin," Tate yelled. "We're coming up on the industrial park. The current is going to funnel between the warehouses. Hold on." We banked hard right. the aluminum hull scraping against a submerged fence post with a sickening screech. We were now in the approach lane to the factory, or what was left of it. The parking lot was gone. The security booth was gone. All I could see were the roofs of the semi-trucks parked at the loading docks, looking like metal whales breaching the surface. And there, in the center of the devastation, was Gordon Manufacturing. The water was halfway up the first-floor windows. The pressure of the current was immense, pushing against the brick walls. I could see the water churning violently at the corners of the building, creating whirlpools that could suck a man down in seconds. "Where are they?" Tate shouted, scanning the building. "I don't see anyone on the fire escape." My heart stopped. The fire escape was on the north side, the side taking the brunt of the current. If they had tried to go out that way, they would have been swept away. "Shidi, check the roof access." I pointed to the west side of the building. "There's a maintenance ladder near the HVAC units." Tate swung the boat around, fighting the eddy created by the building's corner. The engine whined in protest as we cut across the flow. As we rounded the corner, I saw them. Huddled on the flat tar and gravel roof, soaking wet and shivering in the driving rain, was the entire shift. They were clustered together under a small overhang near the ventilation shafts. "Boom, there!" I yelled, waving my arms. "Tate, get us closer." Ben saw us first. He stood up, waving a red rag, probably a shop towel, over his head. I could see him shouting, but the wind swallowed his voice. Then I saw Archer Gordon. He was standing apart from the group, clutching his briefcase to his chest like a life preserver. He looked small, he looked terrified. And for the first time in 10 years, he looked at me without a shred of arrogance. He looked at me like I was his only hope. Say Chapter 6, The Roof Trap. "I can't get flush with the roof," Tate yelled. "The water level is 5 feet below the parapet wall. If I get too close, the surge will smash the boat against the brick." "Get me close enough to throw a line," I shouted back. "I'll go up. We have to ferry them down in groups." Tate nodded and maneuvered the skiff with expert precision. He held us steady in the eddy, the nose of the boat bobbing just 6 feet from the wall. As I grabbed the coil of heavy rope and swung it like a lasso, it soared through the air and landed with a wet thwap on the roof. "Tie it off!" I screamed. Linda grabbed the rope. She looped it around the base of a massive HVAC unit and knotted it tight. I gave it a sharp tug. Solid. "Keep the engine running, Tate. I'm climbing up." I shimmied up the rope, my boots slipping on the wet brick until I hooked a leg over the parapet wall. I rolled onto the gravel roof, gasping for breath. The scene was pathetic. 40 adults, skilled workers, parents, and grandparents were huddled like frightened children. They were soaked to the bone. Ben was shivering violently, his lips blue. "Austin!" Linda cried out, running toward me and grabbing my arm. We thought nobody knew we were here. The phones went dead an hour ago." "I knew," I said, squeezing her shoulder. "I told you I'd work on it." I looked around the group. "All right, listen to me. We have a boat down there. Well, but it can only take 10 people at a time. We are going to do this orderly. Sick and injured first, then those with kids waiting, then the rest." "Thank God," someone sobbed. Suddenly, Archer Gordon pushed through the crowd. His expensive suit was ruined, plastered to his body. His hair was matted to his forehead. He still held that briefcase. "Thank God you're here, Olson," Gordon stammered, his teeth chattering. "Get me on that boat. I need to contact the CEO. I have crucial, company assets in this case." He tried to step toward the parapet, but I stepped in his path. I was 6 feet tall and built from lifting steel. He was built from lifting lattes. I didn't move an inch. "Get back in line, Gordon," I said, my voice cutting through the rain. "Excuse me?" Gordon blinked, rain dripping off his nose. "I am the plant manager. I am the ranking officer here. I go first." "You fired me at noon," I said, leaning in close so he could see the anger in my eyes. "Remember?" "Yes, get off my property," you said. "Well, this is my rescue operation now, and on my boat, we follow the law of the sea. Captain goes down with the ship. Or in this case, the manager waits until every single one of his employees is safe." "You can't do this," Gordon shrieked, looking at the rising black water below. "That building is unstable. It could collapse." "Exactly," I said, cold, "which is why you should have evacuated them at 10 a.m. when I told you to. Now stand back, or I swear to God." I'll let you swim." I turned my back on him. "Ben, you're up first. Let's get you down to Tate." Ben limped forward, a look of profound gratitude on his face. Behind him, the other workers watched. They looked at Gordon, shivering and impotent with his briefcase, and then they looked at me. For the first time all day, they weren't looking at a boss. They were looking at a leader. "Let's move," I ordered. The water is still rising. Chapter 7. You wait your turn. The evacuation was grueling. The rain lashed at us sideways, stinging our faces like hail. Each trip down to the skiff was a battle against gravity and slick, mossy brick. "Easy, Ben! One rung at a time!" I shouted over the wind as I guided the older man down the makeshift ladder I'd rigged. Tate was a master at the helm. He kept the boat steady in the surging current, fighting the eddies that threatened to smash the hull against the building. Every time a new group of 10 climbed aboard, the skiff rode lower in the water, dangerously close to swamping. "Go, go, go," Tate would roar, gunning the engine and peeling away from the wall, leaving a wake of white foam. I stood on the roof with the remaining workers, watching the boat disappear into the gray mist, praying it would return. Each round trip took 20 agonizing minutes. 20 minutes of listening to the building groan under the pressure of the river. 20 minutes of watching the water inch higher up the brickwork. By the third trip, only 10 of us remained on the roof. Me, 7 terrified employees, and Archer Gordon. Gordon was pacing back and forth near the edge, clutching his briefcase so tight his knuckles were white. He looked like a trapped animal. Every time the building shuddered, he let out a whimper. "He's taking too long," Gordon snapped, yet his voice high and frantic. "Why is he going so slow? Does he know who I am? I need to get this case to headquarters." I turned slowly to face him. The other workers, 3 women from assembly and 4 guys from the warehouse, were huddled together under a tarp I'd found. They looked at Gordon with a mixture of pity and disgust. "He's navigating a flood, Gordon," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Not a calm lake on a Sunday. A negligence. I will sue that boat driver negligence. I will sue that boat driver for endangerment. I will make sure you never work again." I laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound that seemed to surprise even me. "Negligence? You locked 40 people in a flooding factory to save a few cardboard boxes. You think a lawsuit is your biggest problem? Buddy, you're going to prison," Gordon blanched. "I followed protocol. The warnings were unclear." "The warnings were clear at 10 a.m., I shot back, "and they were crystal clear at noon when I walked out. You gambled with our lives, and you lost." Just then, the building gave a sickening lurch. A loud crack echoed from below, followed by the sound of rushing water. The roof beneath our feet tilted slightly. Screams erupted from the group. One of the women, Maria, started to hyperventilate. "Boss, the foundation is shifting," I yelled. "Everyone move to the center, away from the edge." We scrambled toward the Chivi AC units, huddled together on the highest point of the sloping roof. The water below was now churning violently, foam and debris swirling in a vortex where the corner of the building used to be. Gordon was paralyzed with fear. He stood near the edge, staring down into the abyss. "Move, you idiot!" I roared. It slid across the wet tar paper, stopping just short of the briefcase. He stumbled and fell to his knees, dropping the briefcase. It slid across the wet tar paper, stopping inches from the edge. "My papers!" he shrieked, crawling toward it. "Leave it!" I shouted. "It's just paper!" "You don't understand!" he wailed, his eyes wide and manic. "It's everything!" Suddenly, the roar of an engine cut through the storm. Tate was back. The skiff burst through the curtain of rain, bouncing over the waves like a skipping stone. "Hurry!" Tate bellowed through a megaphone. "The north wall is collapsing. Get in. Now." Chapter 8. The Muddy Aftermath. The loading was chaotic. The boat was rocking violently, and the roof was now angled downward, making every step treacherous. "Women first," I commanded. Maria and the others scrambled down the ladder, practically falling into Tate's arms. Then the men, one by one, since they jumped or slid down into the safety of the skiff. Finally, it was just me and Gordon. The boat was full. Tate looked up at me, his face grim. "We're heavy, Austin. One more, maybe 2 if they're light. That's it." I looked at Gordon. He was scrambling to his feet, clutching that damn briefcase again. He looked at the boat, then at me. "Me first!" he yelled, pushing past me toward the ladder. "I'm the manager!" I grabbed his collar and slammed him back against the AC unit. "I told you." Gordon, the captain is the last one off. You get in that boat. I'll wait for the next run." Gordon looked at me, stunned. You're staying?" "Get in the boat!" I shoved him toward the edge. "Go!" He didn't argue. He practically threw himself down the ladder, landing in a heap on the floor of the skiff. He scrambled to a seat, hugging his briefcase, not even looking back up. Tate looked up at me, his eyes wide. "Austin, there's no next run. The building is going down." "But jump!" I looked at the water. It was 10 feet below, a raging torrent of mud and debris. "Go, Tate!" I yelled, waving him off. "Get them safe. I'll swim for the tree line." "Austin, no!" Tate screamed, but he had no choice. A massive tree trunk slammed into the side of the building, sending a shudder through the entire structure. The boat was in danger of being crushed. Tate gunned the engine and peeled away, the overloaded skiff fighting the current. I watched them go. Boom! I saw the terrified faces of my coworkers looking back. I saw Gordon, head down, refusing to look at the man who had saved his life. The building groaned again. A fissure opened up in the roof near my feet. I didn't wait. I ran to the south edge, judged the distance to a large oak tree that was still standing about 20 feet away, and leaped. I hit the water hard. The cold knocked the wind out of me. The current grabbed me instantly, dragging me under. I tumbled in the darkness, thick grit filling my mouth and nose. I kicked wildly, my hand brushing against something solid, a branch. I grabbed it with everything I had. My muscles screamed as the water tried to rip me away. I pulled myself up, gasping for air, coughing up river water. I climbed higher into the branches of the old oak, shivering uncontrollably. I watched as Gordon in manufacturing groaned one last time. The north wall buckled, and the roof collapsed inward with a sound like thunder. Yet the building was swallowed by the river. If I had stayed 5 more minutes, I would be dead. I clung to that tree for 4 hours until a National Guard helicopter spotted me. When they finally winched me up into the chopper, wrapped in a thermal blanket, the first thing the medic said was, "You're lucky to be alive, son. That whole industrial park is gone." "Yeah," I rasped, my throat raw. "Lucky." But as I looked down at the muddy expanse of water below, I didn't feel lucky. I felt angry. And I knew exactly what I had to do next. Chapter 9. The Threat and the Call. The shelter was set up in the high school gymnasium. It was a sea of cots, sobbing families, and the smell of wet wool and bleach. I found Ben sitting on a cot near the entrance, a Red Cross blanket draped over his shoulders. When he saw me walk in, still in my sodden clothes, he burst into tears. "Austin!" he cried, struggling to stand up. We saw the building go down. We thought you were gone." "I'm too stubborn to drown, Ben," I said, managing a weak smile. "Is everyone accounted for?" "Yeah," Ben nodded, wiping his eyes. "Everyone made it, thanks to you." "Where's Gordon?" I asked, my voice hardening. Ben pointed to the far corner of the gym. "Over there. He's been on his phone for an hour. He still has that briefcase." I walked across the gym. People stopped and stared, whispering. They knew who I was. They knew what had happened. As Gordon saw me coming, he hung up his phone and stood, trying to muster some of his old authority, but he looked small and pathetic in his ruined suit. "Olson," he said, his voice shaky, I'm glad you made it. It would have been a PR nightmare if you hadn't." I stopped a foot away from him. "A PR nightmare? Is that what a human life is to you?" "Look, let's not be dramatic," Gordon said, holding up a hand. "I appreciate what you did. Really, in fact, I'm prepared to offer you your job back, with a raise. Once we rebuild, of course." "Keep your job," I spat. "I'm going to the labor board. I'm going to the press. I'm going to tell everyone exactly why we were in that building until the last second." Gordon's eyes narrowed. He leaned in close, lowering his voice. "You do that, Austin, and I will destroy you. I have lawyers who cost more per hour than you make in a year. I'll say you panicked. I'll say you incited a riot and refused to evacuate when I ordered it. Who are they going to believe? The man with the MBA or the disgruntled foreman who got fired for insubordination?" He tapped the briefcase. "I have the logs, Austin. I have the timestamps. I can make the paperwork say whatever I want it to say. You were never a hero. You were a liability." I stared at him. The audacity was breathtaking. He was going to frame me for his own incompetence. "You really are a piece of work." Gordon," I said quietly. "I'm a survivor," he sneered. "Just like you. Now go get some dry clothes and think about your pension. You're 55, Austin. Who else is going to hire you?" I walked away. I didn't go to the clothes distribution. I walked out of the gym into the cool night air. I pulled out my phone. It was water damaged. The screen cracked, but it still worked. I dialed a number I hadn't called in 5 years. "Marcus?" I said when the voice answered. It's Austin Olson. I need a favor. A big one. Austin? The voice on the other end was sharp, alert. I saw the news about the flood. Are you okay? I'm alive, I said, but I need you to come down here. Bring your laptop, and bring your badge. What's going on? Marcus asked. I have a boss who thinks he can rewrite history, I said, looking back at the gym where Gordon was holding court. I need you to help me prove he's lying. And Marcus? Yet he's got a briefcase full of company assets that he risked 40 lives to save. I have a feeling those assets aren't just inventory lists. I'm on my way, Marcus said. Sit tight. The cavalry is coming. Chapter 10. The Wet Documents. The Red Cross shelter was chaos, a low roar of weeping and confusion, but I found a quiet corner near the equipment closet. My phone was dying, flickering like a strobe light, but I managed to send Marcus my location before the screen went black for good. Then I sat on a metal folding chair, still shivering in my damp clothes, watching Archer Gordon across the gym. He was huddled with two men in suits who had arrived 20 minutes ago. Lawyers, no doubt. They were whispering, glancing at me, then back at the briefcase Gordon kept pinned under his arm like a lifeline. Here, a voice said softly. I looked up. It was Linda. She held out a steaming styrofoam cup of coffee and a dry blanket. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but she offered a weak smile. Thanks, Linda, I rasped, taking the cup. The heat seeped into my frozen hands. Ben told me what Gordon said to you, she whispered, sitting next to me, about blaming you, about the logs. I took a sip of the bitter coffee. He's scared, Linda. Scared people make mistakes. We won't let him lie, she said fiercely. All of us. We know the truth. We saw you fight for us. We saw him cower. It might not be enough, I said, looking at the lawyers. Company records carry weight. If he doctored the evacuation logs before the power went out, if he made it look like I delayed the order. Just then, the double doors of the gym swung open. A man walked in who looked completely out of place among the flood victims. He wore a crisp trench coat, carried a ruggedized laptop case, and had the sharp scanning gaze of a hawk. It was Marcus Vance. He spotted me instantly and strode over, bypassing the registration desk. He looked older than I remembered, more gray in his beard, but his eyes were the same, intense, intelligent. Austin, he said, gripping my hand firmly, you look like hell. Feel like it too, I admitted. Thanks for coming, Marcus. I know it's a drive. For you, I'd drive through the flood, he said, pulling up a chair. Now, tell me everything. Start from the first drop of rain. I told him. I told him about the rising gauge, the refusal to evacuate, the threats, the firing. I told him about the roof, the rescue, and Gordon's obsession with the briefcase. When I finished, Marcus sat back, tapping his chin. So he prioritized a briefcase over 40 lives, and now he's lawyered up before the water has even receded. That screams cover-up. He said he has the logs, I said. He claims they'll prove I was negligent. Marcus smirked. Electronic logs are one thing, but physical evidence, that's harder to fake in a flood. He glanced at Gordon. Gee, that briefcase is the key. If he risked drowning for it, whatever is inside isn't just standard paperwork. It's leverage. How do we get it? I asked. He won't let it out of his sight. We don't need to steal it, Marcus said, opening his laptop. We just need to make him open it, publicly. He began typing furiously. I'm pulling the company's public filings and insurance records. If Gordon was cooking the books or hiding safety violations, there will be a digital trail. But we need a catalyst. He looked up at me. Austin, you said he has lawyers here? Good. That means this is already a legal matter. As a state labor investigator, I have jurisdiction to secure evidence in an active disaster zone involving workplace negligence. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a badge. It glinted under the gym lights. Let's go say hello, Marcus said, standing up. And Austin, let me do the talking. You just look like the hero he tried to drown. Chapter 11. The Boardroom Raid. We marched across the gym floor. The noise of the crowd seemed to fade as people noticed us, the ragged foreman and the man in the trench coat, heading straight for the plant manager. Gordon saw us coming. He stood up abruptly, his lawyers flanking him like bodyguards. Mr. Olson, one of the suits said, stepping forward, if you're here to discuss severance, this isn't the time or place. Bob, my client is under extreme stress. I'm not here for severance, I said, my voice steady. I'm here for answers. And who is this? The lawyer asked. looking down his nose at Marcus. Marcus didn't blink. He flashed his badge. Marcus Vance, State Department of Labor, Special Investigations Unit. I'm here to open an inquiry into the incident at Gordon Manufacturing. The lawyer stiffened. Gordon went pale. This is highly irregular, the lawyer sputtered. The facility is underwater, yet there is no scene to investigate. There are witnesses, Marcus countered, gesturing to the room full of workers, and there is physical evidence. Specifically, the documentation Mr. Gordon rescued from the site. Gordon clutched the briefcase tighter. This is private property. These are confidential corporate documents. Actually, Marcus said coolly, under State Emergency Statute 44B, in the event of a mass casualty risk involving potential gross negligence, as all relevant materials on site or removed from the site are subject to immediate impoundment. That includes your briefcase, Mr. Gordon. You can't take this, Gordon shrieked, his voice cracking. It's privileged. Privileged or incriminating? Marcus asked, stepping closer. Because I just pulled your safety compliance records from the state database. You've had 3 citations for blocked exits in the last year, and now it's an act of God. The flood was nature. An act of God. The flood was nature, I cut in. Keeping us there was a choice. Open the case, Gordon. No, he yelled. Marcus pulled out his phone. I can have a subpoena here in an hour, or you can open it now and show us that you were just saving inventory lists. If there's nothing to hide, then there's no problem. The lawyers exchanged a look. They knew a losing battle when they saw one. One of them leaned in and whispered to Gordon. Gordon looked trapped. He looked at the lawyers, at Marcus, and finally at me. His face crumpled. With shaking hands, he placed the briefcase on a cot and clicked the latches open. The lid popped up. Inside, there were no inventory lists, no production schedules. There were stacks of cash, thick banded bundles of $100 bills. And beneath them, a series of passports and a ledger. Well, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a whisper. That doesn't look like cardboard stock. He picked up the ledger. It was handwritten. I peered over his shoulder. It was a list of off-book sales, high-grade copper, and electronics sold out the back door for cash, bypassing the company accounts entirely. Gordon had been running a black market operation out of the factory. He wasn't trying to save the company's assets. Yet he was trying to save his retirement fund before the flood exposed his missing inventory. Embezzlement, Marcus said flatly, and grand larceny. You kept them there to cover your tracks, didn't you? You needed the flood to destroy the evidence of what was missing. Gordon sank onto the cot, his head in his hands. The lawyers stepped away from him, distancing themselves from the radioactive fallout. I just needed a little more time, Gordon whispered. You almost killed 40 people for time? I asked, looking at the cash. It was wet, muddy, and utterly worthless compared to the lives in this room. Officers, Marcus called out to the 2 sheriff's deputies standing by the door. We have a situation here. As they led Gordon away in handcuffs, he didn't look at me. He just stared at the floor, a broken man who had gambled everything on greed and lost.